You're listening to the Clean Comedy Podcast with your host, James Creviston.
Hey, everybody, it's James. Welcome to the Clean Comedy Podcast. And today I have a legend for you guys. Now, you guys know that I love comedy. I love comedy history. I love people who have changed comedy, who have been just like had an effect in comedy. Now, you guys know that I literally got done reading I'm Dying Up Here, the whole history of comedy in the golden age of comedy, what they call the golden age of comedy. And second, now they're having a golden age of comedy 2.0 is what they're calling it. But this guy was like the guy. Like when you talk about that era, this is the guy. You think like, oh, I know everybody. No, you don't. And you start digging into comedy history, you start finding gold. And this is the man. So he's made over 500 appearances on national television, including 61 appearances on The Tonight Show and 50 on Letterman, and even hosted in David Letterman's absence. He's appeared in all the main rooms in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, Lake Tahoe, and Reno. And for 14 years, he toured as one of my favorite acts, opening act. He toured for 14 years, the opening act for Mr. Frank Sinatra. Please give it up for Mr. Tom Dreesen. Tom, welcome, sir. Hold on.
Am I on?
You're on. Okay. You're on.
That was a nice introduction. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this.
So I learned first about you reading I'm Dying Up Here, the whole history of comedy in like the 70s and all that stuff and everything that happened at the Comedy Store. And your name came up over and over and over again in this book. And I'm like, who is this person? Like I feel like I've seen the name on the wall, but I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. What's happening here? So then I start digging deeper. I find your book, right? I read your book. I go, oh my gosh, this guy is like a legend. Where is he? Why is nobody talking about him? And I'm like digging and digging and digging. Well, first of all, we have a ton in common. We both were in the Navy, right? Both had to go through that terrible Great Lakes boot camp there. That's the worst place ever, right?
I got one worse than that, but go ahead.
Okay. We both had kind of rough childhoods growing up and stuff. And we both just, are big Frank Sinatra fans, and then also both comedians now. So there's like a lot of little things that we have. But like, what's your worst than Navy boot camp?
Well, I mean, when you said Navy, I went through Navy boot camp, but I spent 4 years in the Navy, and I served 9 months in a Marine Corps unit called NEGDF, Naval Emergency Ground Defense Force, and had to go through much worse training after going through Navy boot camp, but anyhow, yeah, first of all, I was 17 years old. The day I turned 17, I went in the Navy. I was a kid, I was a kid, and it was all a new experience for me. However, I think the Navy totally changed my life in so many ways. I was a high school dropout. As you read the book, I had 8 brothers and sisters. There were 8 of us. We lived in a shack. We were real poor. We had no bathtub and no shower, no hot water. And I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. And none of this do I regret. But when I went in the Navy, for the first time in my life, I was equal to my peers. Because in high school, you're going to high school and everybody's dressing to the nines. I had holes in my shoes, and if you had holes in shoes, you put cardboard in it. If a window broke in the shack, you put a rag in it. So when I went in the Navy, as you know, they shaved all of our heads. We all wore the same clothes. For the first time in my life, I was equal to my peers by sight, and also I had, a shower. I could let as much hot water flow on me as I wanted, and I had more than one pair of shoes. To this day, in my life, I've been very fortunate in my life with what I've gone through, what I have today. But to this day, the thing that makes me feel the most satisfied is if I can stand in the shower and let as much hot water flow on me as I want. I mean, I can't tell you the inner peace that comes over me, and all because of that childhood. But and because of going in the Navy, and also I got a high school diploma from the Navy, and I began to read. We're out at sea. I was on 2 aircraft carriers. I was on the USS Essex and the USS Tarawa, and we spent a lot of time overseas in the Antarctic and so forth and so on. So we spent 66 days in the Antarctic. So I began to read everything that I could get my hands on positive mental attitude, on books that help develop your mind, and because of that, I give motivation talks now all around the country on 4 subjects: perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those 4 points. And specifically for comedians, I do motivation talks called The Joy of Stand-Up Comedy and How to Get There. And I've done that in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in Philadelphia, in New York, to comedians. I'm actually in LA here. I did it at the Comedy Store. I did it at the Comedy Chateau. I did it at the Laugh Factory. And I'm doing it in Chicago on September 13th at Zanies in Chicago at noon at Zanies on September 13th. And all the comedians of Chicago will come in. And I motivate them on this wonderful profession that we're in, the greatest profession on the planet. And I explain why it is the greatest profession on the planet. Not because you and I are in it, because what it does to those who come to see us and why. We can talk about that later. So again, the Navy had a profound effect on me. And also something interesting. Do they call you James or Jimmy, or how do you?
I go by James usually. My dad is Jim, so like I never did Jimmy or Jim, but yeah.
And James, one of the things that I grew up on the south side of Chicago, suburb Harvey, Illinois, steel mills and factories and taverns, and everybody there fought. If two people got in an argument in a bar, they went outside and beat each other's brains. And if they were arguing about the Cubs versus the White Sox, so my whole childhood, and even in bars and our shining shoes, if guys were arguing, they go outside. They go out in the parking lot, and everybody'd go out of the tavern and watch two guys beat the hell out of each other. When I went in the Navy, for the first time, I saw intellectual combat. I would see a guy from North Carolina, a redneck from Alabama, a black guy from Detroit, a Jewish kid from New York, Italian kid from Chicago. They would get in these heated discussions, and as you know, there's no skylarking, in the Service. I push you, and I'm on report. I can't even, because aboard ship, you can't do stuff like that. Oh. Somebody could fall down a ladder and and break your neck or go over the side. So that was taboo. There was no fighting in the service. So if you're going to get in an argument, I saw them intellectually arguing. And I thought, wow, I've never seen that before. Where two guys are getting a heated debate, and I think, they're going to start throwing it down now. But they didn't. The guy might say at the end of that discussion, I never thought about that, James. Yeah, you got a point there. I had never seen that before, intellectual combat. Anyhow, so the Navy had a profound effect on my life, and to this day.
Yeah, same for me. It was one of those things where I grown up around a military family. I grew up around Fort Hood, which is the largest military base in the United States, in Texas. So I didn't want to be in the Army. I knew that, and I knew there were some other things, but I wanted to go see the world, and I knew I was never going to be wealthy enough, or at least I didn't think I would be wealthy enough to ever travel the world. So I was like, well, if I join the Navy, I could see the world, and I did. I seen Australia and Thailand and Singapore and a lot of the Middle East, a lot, way too more than I wanted, but. I would agree for that.
Were you aboard ship, or were you?
Yeah, I was on a guided missile destroyer, the USS Higgins. That was my ship.
What years were you in?
99 to 2003. So pre 9/11 and post 9/11. So both sides of that whole thing.
I've got as they said in the Navy, I got socks older than you.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. It's great. Yeah.
My grandpa used to tell me that because I had kind of had a smart mouth as a kid, I like to be silly and kind of talk back or whatever. And my grandpa was in the Navy, and he would say, when you get in the Navy, some chief's going to beat you with a fire hose. And I figured that was probably pretty close to what was going to happen. It didn't ever happen, but I got taken aside a few times in my early time and told, hey, you better clean yourself up. And I did. I eventually did get a good job. It was a good thing for me, because I think I probably was on a fast track to getting myself into some bigger trouble later on if I didn't find a way to divert. I knew I wasn't ready for college at the time. I just graduated high school, but I was kind of a smart aleck and wanted to kind of do my own thing. And the Navy was what I needed. It really put me on the right track. I joke about Great Lakes, but here's the thing. I don't like snow. So when I had to go march around in snow in Great Lakes during wintertime, I was like, this is not for me. That's part of the work.
I went in the wintertime too there. and it was, you'd be out in the cold, marching in the cold, and they'd take you in some classroom, and it'd be 110 degrees, and Marlin Spike seamanship.
Yep.
And if you fell asleep, you got put on report. but you'd get in that warm classroom after marching in the snow, and then you're nodding off. And but the Marine Corps thing, when I was it was pre-Vietnam, and all of a sudden, what they were realizing that naval personnel would be taking ground troops up rivers, and if the boat got shot out from underneath them, the naval personnel had no ground training, and so they decided they were going to send one guy from every squadron. I was in a squadron in Quonset Point on that too, Naval Air Torpedo Unit, and they were going to send one guy from every squadron to train with the Marine Corps. Now, and my buddy was a yeoman in the office, and he told me this story I never forget. There was a Chief Gamba, an Italian chief, and I'm Italian, Irish Italian, and anyhow, he didn't like me. He because I was like you, I'm always telling jokes, I'm running around and being a smartass, and anyhow, my buddy said that the lieutenant commander came in and said to the commander in the office, my buddy was a yeoman. He said, and Chief Gamble was looking through the files, through some files, and the lieutenant commander said to the commander, "We have to send one man from our squadron to the Marine Corps." And without hesitation, Chief Gamble had his back to him. He was taking files out. He said, "Send that effing Dreesen." I didn't know if I could swear on your podcast, but
that's funny. No, we can always edit, so no worries. There's no worries. So your career in comedy has spanned decades. You've done amazing things. If you guys are watching, you can see behind him. You've been on, The Tonight Show, like that's when it was Johnny, and it was great. And then Late Night with David Letterman. You've been with Frank Sinatra. You toured with Frank Sinatra, which sounds amazing. Like I grew up loving Frank Sinatra. My grandpa introduced me to Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, and so all that stuff. That's the stuff that I grew up listening to. And then I love some modern music and whatever. But that's, if you play Sinatra, like, I'm gonna feel like I'm the happiest in my life. And I never got to see him perform live, which is terribly sad for me. You're lucky you got to see him every night for 14 years, with a few exceptions. But what was that journey like? And what's like your best memory from that? Because I know you probably have a ton of great memories, but like, what's the best memory from that whole experience?
I can't describe to you what it's. I was a little boy shining shoes in bars, and Frank Sinatra was on the jukeboxes. All of it. I was 10 years old, shining shoes in all these bars. And even later, when I came out of the service, I was a bartender in those bars, and Frank would be on the jukebox. "Come fly with me, let's fly away." And all my buddies would say, "Man, what would that be like? Can you imagine that, flying with Frank Sinatra?" I never thought I'd ever be in show business. It was the furthest thing from my mind. But flash forward, here I was flying in Frank Sinatra's private jet all over the world. And he's saying, "We're going to kill him. We're going to knock him dead tonight, Tommy." And, it was so surreal sometimes. I'd want to pinch myself, The other thing too is I had paid a lot of dues before I met Frank Sinatra, and when I first started doing the Tonight Show and I started touring with Sammy Davis Jr., I toured with Sammy for 3 years. I toured with Natalie Cole, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Tony Orlando and Dawn, Mac Davis, Frankie Avalon, James Darren, Smokey Robinson. I toured with Smokey for years, and then one day I'm touring with Frank. Now, with those other artists, you might do a room of 1,500, 2,500 with Sammy sometimes in the round, Smokey. I'm opening for Frank Sinatra in front of 20,000 people in the Nassau Coliseum and coliseums all around the country. In Hawaii, 40,000 people, outdoor arena with screens. There's a totally different, you're a comedian, you know what I'm talking about. If I were to do 30 minutes tonight at the Laugh Factory or whatever, trying out new material at the Comedy Store, and I took that same exact 30 minutes to opening for Frank at the Nassau Coliseum in front of 20,000 people. That same material takes on a totally different dynamic in front of 20,000 people. Now, not only that, let me give you the scenario, James. You're going to open for Frank Sinatra. I'm going to say to you, James, there's 20,000 people out there, James. It's 5 minutes before you're going on. And this is what his road manager told me the first time that I opened for him, with tongue in cheek, but he said, this is what they said, "James, there's 20,000 people out there, and they're all around you. They're not proscenium. They're not in front of you. They're behind you, on the left of you, right in front, in the center. James, there's 20,000 people out there. I want you to go out there, and for the next 30 minutes, I want you to hold their attention. Oh, one more thing, James. I want you to hold their attention, but I want you to make them laugh for the next 30 minutes. One more thing, James. I want you to make them laugh. I want you to make them laugh when you want them to laugh. I want you to pull the strings on the emotions of 20,000 people. No props, no tricks, no charts, no special arrangement, no special orchestra, no lighting, no special lighting, just you and 20,000 people. And one more thing, James, not one of them came to see you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it's like. That's what it was like every night. And I had to, fortunately, I had experience in the business. I was a veteran. When you walk out in front of 20, first of all the lights go down low in the arena and people, whoa. And then in the orchestra pit, the orchestra strikes up, bum, ba, da, bum, ba. You know, people go, oh, and they say, and now the comedy star of our show, oh, you know, they think Frank is coming out.
Right.
So you walk out there, not in Vegas or Tahoe or Reno, Atlantic City, they had your name on the marquee, but in the big arenas, it was Sinatra. So you walk out there, you can't go into your A material from Jump Street, you know, because you know you've got to bring the focus to you now. In an arena of 20,000 people, there's 2,000 or 3,000 still trying to find their seats, you know, at that moment or more. Now, when you get to the center of that arena, I've got to bring that focus to me. Now, I'm not going to open with my best joke or anything like that. First thing I do is I'd say, you know, how many of you out there thought Frank Sinatra was coming out? Applaud. And I didn't say raise your hand. I'd say applaud. They'd applaud it. And I'd say, I know just how you feel. I'm a little bit disappointed myself. And the joke is on me. Now I'd say, how many of you out there are in this arena for your very first time? Applaud. And they would applaud. I'd say, how many of you out there are seeing Frank Sinatra live your very first time? Applaud. And they'd applaud. You know, you see what I'm doing here? I'd say, how many of you out there aren't wearing any underwear? Applaud. They'd applaud. I talk, you react. I talk, you react. I talk, you react. I'm schooling them to come to me, behind me, all around. These are throwaway lines, but I'm bringing them to me. The focus is here, center. You know, then once I did that, I would do a couple of local jokes. I'd write jokes about whatever city we're in, Louisville, Kentucky, Omaha, Nebraska, Detroit, Chicago, that the locals knew about something that was going on in that community at that time. I'd have a couple local jokes that I would throw out about. Now, your mayor the other day, your Mayor Sullivan or whatever his name was, and I would do and then I would go into now I got him, you know, and then I would go into my A material, you know, and it was just as exciting because Frank Sinatra's audiences were polite, they were respectful, you know. I never, only one time in all the 14 years I toured with, ever have a heckler, but he wasn't really a heckler. He, you know, it was in Atlanta, a real funny line at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, Georgia. And I walked out, and I wasn't out there a minute when a guy hollered out, "Where's Frank Sinatra?" And I said, "He's outside looking for your manners." You know, and the guy applause. And that was the only time because his audiences were polite. So when you got them and you got them, it got them up for Frank. You know, and that's the reason I stayed with him all those years. During those 14 years, I toured with Frank Sinatra, staying in his home 6 times a year in a compound down in Rancho Mirage. He at first was the boss of the tour, of this incredible tour. And then he became like a friend. We hung out together. And toward the end of his life, he was more like a father to me. I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and I spoke at his funeral. You know, again, all the 14 years I was with Frank, I turned down more sitcoms than most comedians get offered in a lifetime. I took more opportunities because I knew this was the end of an era. You know, I toured with Sammy Davis. I did the Dean Martin roast. I knew Dean. I played golf with Dean, and now this is Frank. You know, and I knew this was the end of an era, and I wanted to be there till the end. The other thing too, at that same time, when I was a boy, I was caddying all the time. You know, at that same time, I was on a golf tour. It was a golf tour of celebrity. They called it the Celebrity Golf Tour. Celebrity Players Association. It was basketball, baseball, football, hockey, tennis, and show business people that were 10 handicap or below. So it was Johnny Bench, Mike Schmidt, Mario Lemieux, John Elway, Dan Marino, Michael Jordan. Wow. We had 42 Hall of Famers. In show business, we had Matt Lauer, Brian Gumbo, Smokey Robinson, Frankie Avalon, Eddie Marinel, Jack Wagner. Me, I was the only comedian on the tour. So I used to tell everybody I was the leading money winner among stand-up comedians on that tour. So, and they paid you. Now here I was doing 12 cities a year with them and flying with Frank Sinatra all over the world. If you would have told me when I was a little boy shining shoes, hear that guy in the jukebox, one day he will be your friend and you'll be flying in his private jet and performing with him, I'd have said it can't happen. If you'd have told me I've always been in sports. I played in the fast pitch softball league, the show business league, till I was 57. I played in the basketball league till I was 48 years old in the Van Nuys basketball. And so, and I've always been I ran 3 marathons. I ran 54-mile relays for the NBC relay team. So I've always been athletic. But if you'd have told me one day when I was a little boy, one day you're going to get inside of an arena and you're going to compete with the greatest athletes who lived in your lifetime, I'd say that's impossible. You're going to fly with Frank. But that's what was happening to me. And Christopher Morley, the author, once said, success is living the life you want. So I was living the life I want. I was doing all these things. Could I have had sitcoms? Could I have been, 10 times, more money than I have and all that? Yeah. But a wise philosopher once said that in the end, all you have are memories. Make some good ones. I got some great ones. That's why I wrote the book.
I love it. Your book is amazing too, and it is one of those things where I grew up in poverty too. I had kind of a terrible childhood and life and all that stuff, and so I slowly just I'm gonna get better. I'm gonna reach these things. I want to be successful, and so I didn't start comedy until I was about 34. I started taking comedy classes or whatever and learn how to write a joke or whatever. 35, I did a half hour for my 35th birthday. I decided I would do half an hour for my 35th birthday. So that was my kind of debut there. But I did, open mics and little shows leading up to that. But that's when I started. So I started what's considered late for a lot of comedians to do comedy. But that's what I want to do is I want to change the direction of my life. And I like that you talked about positive thinking books and that you go and give talks on this stuff. If you had to start over, say you had to start over today, in this day and age, you're fresh, out of the Navy, and now you're starting comedy, what would be your career path now? What would be your trajectory, or what would you do differently, or what would be your process? Because it's kind of unique, right?
It's a totally different thing. Hold that point, because I want to tell you, when I started out, there were no comedy clubs in America. I was with a comedy team. Tim Reed and I were America's first black and white comedy team. History shows we were the last. There's never been one since. And it was in 1969 when we went on stage in September. The world was in turmoil. Vietnam, students were protesting the Vietnam War all over the United States. African Americans were rioting in every major city in the country, including where I grew up in Harvey, one of the largest riots in the country. And Tim Reed and I were going across the land trying to make people laugh in the middle of all of that. Anywhere there was racial tension, we went. In colleges, high schools. We did 11 prisons in 1 year. We did the county jail in Chicago 3 times. Anywhere there was racial tension, we went there. We didn't preach. We tried to make them laugh. In those days, people were saying, we need more discourse among the races. We need more discourse among the races. We need better relations, race relations. You know what Tim Reed and I were having on stage? We were having race relations. We were relating to one another, and we were making fun of all the stereotypes on the white side and on the black side. And so we were way before our time. Our book should have been called before we wrote a book. It should have been called Before Our Time. But anyhow, and again, there were no comedy clubs. So I can't tell you how many times a white kid would come up to me and say, I got a black friend that I'd like to reach out to, but if I do, the white guy's going to call me names. But after watching you and Tim, I'm going to reach out to my black friend. Then a black kid would come up and tell Tim and I, I got a white friend and I kind of like the guy, but if I do, the brothers are going to wear me out. But after watching you and Tom and do this, I'm going to reach out to my white friend. And that meant more to me then, even now, that we were making people laugh. But, again, there were no comedy clubs. So we work what they call the Chitlin circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. The 20 Grand in Detroit. Motown was in Detroit in those days. So all the Motown acts broke their shows in at the 20 Grand before they went on to Vegas. A gangster owned the club. A guy named Bill Kabush, owned the club. So we worked at 20 Grand in Detroit, the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Spear in Chicago, the Guys and Gals Lounge, the Cotton Club, the Sugar Shack in Boston, the Club Harlem in Atlantic City, which was really interesting. In those days, most nightclubs, you opened on a Monday, you closed on a Saturday. At the Club Harlem, all black club, in the Club Harlem, you opened on Saturday night and you closed on the following Friday. But opening show Saturday night was 10 o'clock at night. Second show was 2 o'clock in the morning. Third show was 6 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning. They called it the breakfast show. And that show, all the waiters and waitresses, all the night people would come in Atlantic City. That was before gambling in Atlantic City. But all the pimps would bring their hoes from Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, from Newark, from Philadelphia. The pimps would come down with their hoes. The hoes who did a good job. If they had 10 hoes in their barn, I'm being graphic here, but if they had 3 of them brought in the most money, those 3 went down to with the pimp in the big Cadillacs and Rolls Royces and all, and they'd come in late. They'd make sure they tip the guy in front, so they'd get front seats, but they'd come in late. They don't come in early. They want to come in when everybody sees it, so they get style. The pimp would walk in with all of his ladies and people ooh and ah and all that. Now, opening act was Mama Lou Parks and her dancers, a big heavyset black woman who had dancers, and they got the show rocking. They got the show going. Then it would be a male singing group, then a female singing group, then comedy, and then maybe the headliner would be the Temptations or the OJs or Smokey Robinson or whoever, and I'd be the only white guy in the whole place, 1,300 black people. It was really, and we played off of that. We did all kinds of stuff. So anyhow, that in those days, when the team split up after 6 years, and I became a single, I was devastated. The team, I wanted Tim and Tom to be the best comedy team in America, but Tim wanted to go off more as an actor, and anyhow, it broke my heart. Now, 1975, I'm a single. But here's the difference. In those days, wherever you went in America, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh yeah, you ever been on Johnny Carson?" If you haven't been on Johnny Carson, in the eyes of America, you just want a comedian. You might want to be one. You might going to be one. But that was the stamp of approval. There was a stairway to stardom for comedians in 1975 and the 1980s. It was the Tonight Show. 28 million people watched that show. One appearance on that show, Freddie Prinze got a sitcom the next day. One appearance on that show. I did one appearance on that show. I was in the unemployment line with a wife and 3 kids. The next day, my whole life changed. CBS signed me to a development deal. A guy named Lee Curlin in New York was watching the Tonight Show that night and signed me to a development deal. I couldn't make, my rent money was $225 a month in those days, a wife and 3 kids. I could hardly make rent money. And they handed me a check for $10,000 the next, and $1,850 a month for a year. It was a $25,000 deal. That meant my rent was paid, my groceries. For 1 year, I could now write material and concentrate on my career. So that was a stairway to stardom, and it was a Tonight Show. You say to me, what would I do today?
Yeah,
it's television. It's that social media. That social media that you're a little bit older than these younger kids, but these young kids, they know that social media. That's where you get millions of followers in one night. Dane Cook, when MySpace first came out, he didn't go on national television. He started filling up 15,000 seat arenas from MySpace. So learning how to work that's what I would do different. I would learn to work social media.
that's great. That's exactly what I started doing. I shunned social media for a while, where I was like, it's not the thing I want to do. But it also, I used Twitter, and it got me my first writing gig. It got me my first produced credit. So it did help with some things, but then I just said, I want to step away from that. I was spending a lot of time on there, and it was like, I'm not writing as many jokes. I'm not doing all the things I want to do. So I need to step away. So I stepped away, and I only recently came back to Instagram, because I felt like that's the medium for comedians. You can post clips, you can write silly things and post up there for people to pass along and all that stuff. It just seemed like the right way. And it's slowly growing for me, and I really enjoy doing it. I'm not hitting it as hard as some other people that I know. My friend Darren Carter is getting, thousands of followers every single day. I think he's at, like, last time I looked, he was like 129,000 followers. And
he's a good guy too, by the way. Darren is and I see him all the time. We do the rap and stuff. He's a great guy.
He's amazing, and he's a good friend of mine. He's helped me out a lot in my career, taking me on the road with him, letting me open for him. He's just an amazing person, and I love him. And so to see him keep growing like that, I want nothing but the best for him. And I know that he's going to blow up. I know that there's something that's going to pop for him, and it'll just go the way that he wants it to go, the way he needs it to go. Now, you still do stand up, and right, and you still do, and you go and do speeches. Now, I don't know how you do it because you probably you remember both things, the speeches and the jokes. How do you do that? What's your process of writing jokes, remembering jokes, all that stuff? Because it's not easy sometimes. Sometimes I go, how did that joke go? I wrote it. I know I wrote it like a year ago. I've been doing it, but sometimes my mind just goes blank in the middle of a set, and I'll go, good thing I have like my set list on the side. I can look at it. What's the key to that? Because you're remembering more than just jokes now. Now you're remembering speeches and multiple speeches.
Well, I do a 90-minute show now called "The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh." It's stand-up comedy. I do a 30-minute stand-up comedy, but then I segue over to a bar on the stage that has a bottle of Jack Daniels on it, which was Frank's Drink of Choice. And I tell a funny story at the bar, and while the audience is laughing, all the lights go out, and Frank Sinatra comes on the screen, and he's singing. It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me. Like he's singing to me. I'm behind the bar. Set him up, Joe. I got Leo. So when he gets to the chorus, make it one for my baby and one more for the road. He fades off the screen and the spotlight hits me. And now I'm in a bar and I've come home and the audience is in a bar with me. And I tell him the first time I heard that voice, I was 10 years old, shining shoes in a bar on the south side of Chicago. And he was on the jukebox. Then I take him from that little boy hearing Sinatra on the jukebox on the south side of Chicago to one day carrying his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. So I take them on that journey. And on that journey, it's all about it's about Tim and Tom. It's about me being in the service. Tim and Tom, my 8 brothers and sisters. I'm telling them stories of my life that have a punchline. They're either very poignant or they're funny stories. I take them all the way through the series and the service and blah blah, and finally the Tim and Tom years to getting on the Tonight Show. And all of those have a punchline or an ending to the story. It's not rambling. It's well thought out. So it has a beginning and a middle and ending. And there were times, years ago, I always thought a good comedian can make you laugh for an hour and a half. But a great comedian can make you laugh and cry in that hour and a half. I only saw 2 comedians ever do that, Red Skelton and Richard Pryor. And it was really amazing that you would take an audience, have them laughing, and then take them down to a very sad part and then take them back up again. That's really, I said, one day I want to try that because that was really a challenge to me, because, comedians, hey, we're on a roll. Hey, are you crazy? Take them to the peak, get out of here. Good night, everybody. But to take them, I saw Pryor take an audience up there and I was in the audience. He had me just howling, laughing. And then he took me to a very dark place in his life. And the whole room was silent. And I was gasping. I couldn't believe that he would. And then he turned right around and took them back up where they're all laughing. But I wasn't laughing. I went, ooh, that was something, man. To risk that taking an audience to the highest of high to the lowest of low, and then taking them back up again. That was a challenge. And that's what I do in my one-man show. It's I take them to Frank Sinatra's funeral. What it was like in that moment in that church. And then I end with a very funny monologue because I told a funny story in the church that day, because that's what I knew Frank would want me to do. It's a long story, but every night before I'd go on stage, I'd go by Frank's dressing room and he'd say, Tommy, you going on? I said, yeah. He said, be funny and be brief. He would say that every night. Be funny and be brief. But anyhow, I forgot where we're even going with this conversation.
No, that's perfect. I love that. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't know if you want to talk about it or not, but I wanted to know more about the Comedy Store strike because I know that you were a big player in that you had a big role in negotiating all that stuff, and you haven't been, or at least at the time that I read about it, that you didn't go back after that. But would that be possible today? Like, there's more comedians probably than there's ever been in America. And again, we're still not paid often for stage time. Is that something that you could see happening again? Or do you think that was a one-time thing? And how do you feel about it now afterwards, knowing that your legacy leads to Comedy Store regulars and people that work at the Comedy Store actually still getting paid? Yes, it's not a ton of money. Everybody don't like get excited. But you still get paid for stage time, which is not normal, at least in LA or New York for a lot of comedians.
Yeah, let me go back to the beginning. You
Okay.
know, when I in that comedy store strike is something that has followed me, even though I didn't want it to follow me my whole career. It is part of my life, and so I have to address it all the time because of that book. I'm dying up here.
Yeah.
You know, William Needleceder wrote that book, and it's an excellent book. And he's a former Los Angeles Times reporter, and he was there during that strike. So what he wrote in that book, I will stand by almost every word in that book because he was very authentic. Every comedian should read that book because,
Yeah.
as you point out, it's a great history of that era of comedy. That's the one thing that I'll say. When I started out in stand-up comedy, I knew all the comedians that preceded me, the majority of them. I mean, I didn't know them personally. I knew of them. And because that's the business I was in, and I wanted to know more about the business that I wanted to succeed in.
Yep.
I meet comedians today that they haven't got a clue what most of them think they started stand-up comedy. That, oh, you mean you did stand-up comedy? And I've been doing it for 54 years, but
Yeah.
nonetheless. But here's what happened. I came out to the West Coast after the comedy team stood up. In those days, as I pointed out, everybody said, what do you do for a living? I'm a stand-up comedian. Oh yeah, have you ever been on Johnny Carson? So as a businessman, and we're businessmen, we're in a thing called show business. That's two words, show and business. Well, then as a businessman, I said, well, how do I get on the Tonight Show? I would watch the Tonight Show and say, oh, you got to write material that can make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh. You couldn't say go to hell, couldn't say damn. And if you said the F word, there was no way in hell anybody was going to hire you in those days. Not singers, because they had audiences, family audiences, not clubs at that time. That was before cable television came along. So now you say, well, how do I get on the Tonight Show? I got to get to the West Coast. Freddie Prinze does one appearance, he gets a sitcom the next day. I knew Freddie real well. I knew him before he even did his, he was like 17 when I met him, Anyhow, and that's another story too. But anyhow, so now I go there and I do what everybody does. I pay the dues. I leave my wife and kids in Chicago. My wife actually wrote me a Dear John while I was out there. She didn't want any part of show business. She didn't marry a comedian. She married a guy right out of the Navy, working construction and everything. She lived with her father brought a check home every Friday for his whole life. They had a roof over their head and food on the table. Here I'm going to go into this precarious business of stand-up comedy, and there was no money in it, with a black guy, and we're touring the North and the South. And the fourth time we're on stage, a guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face and tried to beat the bejesus out of me. And I boxed when I was in the service, but he outweighed me by 100 pounds. I mean, I'm coming home all beat up. And this woman says, you want to do this? Are you crazy? But anyhow, but we did get back together, my wife and I. So I'm out on the West Coast, and I end up with no money. I'm sleeping in a Nash Rambler. It wasn't my car. It was up on blocks, I was hitchhiking up and down Sunset Boulevard, begging to work for free at the Comedy Store every night. Finally, I got on after about a month, and all I got on was Mitchie was going to take a look at me, do 5 minutes, and see if I could become a regular at the Comedy Store. And fortunately, I had stage presence. I'd been doing it with the comedy team, and I had some good material. And Mitchie liked it, and she said, "Okay, I'll put you on." You'd go on at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, and then you worked your way down to the maybe 8 o'clock at night on a Wednesday. Getting in prime time until finally you were 1 o'clock in the morning on weekends, and then you were down to prime time, and then you became one of the stars of the Comedy Store. Now from that, I got the Tonight Show to come and see me, and I ended up getting the Tonight Show. And a guy named Craig Tennis came to see me. I auditioned that night with 3 comedy acts, Baum and Eston, a comedy team. Bruce Baum later became Bruce Baby Baum, and been still doing stand-up comedy. And Larry Eston ended up writing for a show called Cheers. And a new kid named Billy Crystal and me, And anyhow, Billy and I got the Tonight Show. So now, after I got the Tonight Show, I got bumped 3 times. Every time I went to the Tonight Show, they ran out of time. They ran out of time. And finally, the 4th time I get there, I was in the makeup room, and Fred DeCordova, the producer, came in, and he said, "I got bad news for you." I said, "What?" He said, "You're going on tonight." And that there's no describing that pressure, James. 28 million people watch that show. When they come to get you out of that green room, and they take you all the way down to you get behind that curtain, and they're in commercial break, and and Doc Severinsen is playing, and and you're in commercial break, and the music stops, and your heart stops because now you're going on live, going out there. There's no mistake in here. Not only did all the talent coordinators watch that show, but the Vegas buyers bought that. Corporate people watched that show in those days. So one appearance, as I said, changed your life. Not only that, my mother had everybody back at home watching, so I couldn't even go back home if I bombed, But now Johnny Carson says, we're back now, and I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight because my next guest is making his first appearance on the Tonight Show. That one line, I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight. It's his first time. You walk out, he's welcome, Tom Beach. You walk out, you can't see the audience, the bright lights hit you. There's a mark on the floor that you hit that mark, and there's a red light on the camera, and they're applauding, and you do your first joke, it gets a laugh. When you do your second joke, it gets a laugh. You do your third joke, it's laugh. Now I hear Johnny and Ed McMahon laughing behind me, and I'm on a roll. I got 8 applause. I finished my monologue, and I said, you've been a wonderful audience. This is my first appearance on the Tonight Show, and show business is a tough life. So if you like me, and you're Protestant, say a prayer. If you're Catholic, light a candle. If you're Jewish, somebody in your family owns a nightclub. Tell them about me, will you? And I say, good night, everybody. I walk off, I go through the curtain, and Johnny Carson calls me back for a second bow. I'm the coordinator, come running around. I say, go back, Johnny. I go back through the curtain. He goes like this, and I never stopped working from that night. I never stopped working from that night in all these years. Now, that being said, I start touring with Sammy Davis Jr. I'm going all around the country, but every time I came home off the road, I would go to the Comedy Store because I'm doing the Tonight Show. I'm doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand. I was the only white comedian doing Soul Train because I had an album in front of an all-black audience, called That White Boy's Crazy. So I need to keep working on new material. So as soon as I came off the road, I had my set nightclub act, but I had to get new material for the next Tonight Show. I'd go to the Comedy Store and sign up. Now, every time you went to the Comedy Store, you went to the original room. It seated like 110 people. That's where you went. Mitzi, in the meantime, had purchased the building, the room next to her that a guy named Art LeBeau used to own. It was a 50s club. Well, there was a 400-seater in that room. And when Mitzi purchased it, she would have Rodney Dangerfield or Jackie Mason or even Buddy Rich. They would appear in that room, and they got the door. If they charged $20 at the door or $30, that's what they got. Mitzi got the drinks and the food, right? So I come off the road, and I go into the original room one night, and lo and behold, they said, Tom, you're not here. You're in the main room. I said, the main room? They said, yeah. I go to the main room, and it's David Letterman, me, Robin Williams, Elaine Boozler, Jay Leno, all these new kids. I was the first one to break out and do the Tonight Show, but place was packed. When I was on stage, I was thinking, wow, I feel like I'm back in Vegas again, still not thinking, after that, we all go to Cantor's where all the comedians hung out. Jay Leno comes in and he said, hey, this is bullshit, man. This is bullshit. She pays all those other guys the door. Maybe it took 5 of us to fill that room, but we still filled the room. They wanted to have a meeting. All the comedians have a meeting. I'm doing good. I'm on the road. I'm making money. But these are my friends. So I go to the meeting, and it was utter chaos. 100 comedians all talking at the same time. The only thing they could come to a conclusion at the end of the meeting was to have another meeting. So I went to the second meeting, and sure enough, it was all chaos again. And I had been in the JCs back in Harvey, Illinois. I knew Robert's Rules of Order. I knew how to conduct a meeting, how to form committees, subcommittees. So I get up on stage and I say, hold on, calm down. I'm going to chair the meeting. And I got them organized. Hold on, Gallagher, hold on. Jay's got the floor, make your point, put it in the form of a motion. And I got them organized. And once you got them organized, this is a brilliant group of people. These are young kids fresh out of college. Now, I then became the spokesman to go over to ask Mitzi, pay the comedians. She did not want to pay them. She said, this is a college. And, anyhow, she had opened up the Westwood Comedy Store and the Comedy Store, and she was making a lot of money. I didn't want to fight with her. I liked Mitzi. Mitzi and I got along real good. And I owed her. I mean, she gave me my breakdown. Anyhow, there was no way she wanted to pay the comedians. And I'd go to her, I kept bringing it back to the comedians. Finally, the comedians decided they want to go on strike. I said, I don't know about striking. I'd been in the Teamsters when I was in Chicago. When I first came out of service, I worked on a loading dock. And I later dropped my card, my Teamster card, and I became management. But I know all that arbitration union, but they wanted to be paid. They wanted to go on strike. So I kept going back to Mitzi. I said, Mitzi, you pay the waiters, you pay the waitresses, you pay the guy who cleans the toilets, you pay the parking lot attendant. Why don't you pay the comedians? She would not hear from it. No, they don't deserve to be paid at this time. Now, one day I wake up. I jump up in the middle of the night. I got it. Why didn't I think of this? I get up in the morning. I go straight to her office, and I sit down. I'm waiting for her. She comes in. I said, Mitzi, you're charging, I think it was $4.50 or $5 at the door. Charge one more dollar. Let the comedians have that $1. If you draw 100 people, they split $100 for the night. If you draw 200 people, they split that. Just the $1. And it won't cost her. She said, no, they don't deserve to be paid at this time. Now I went out of there numb because I thought it was about money. It wasn't about money. If it was about money, we could resolve this issue. Anyhow, so the comedians decided to go on strike. Now, when they decided to go on strike, Steve Bluestein was in charge of publicity. He had that night when they decided to go on strike. And I called Mitzi just 2 hours before that. I said, Mitzi, please, you don't want this to happen. She said, not one red fucking cent. That's what she said. So what are they going to do? So now they're going to say, no, Daddy Archibald, one of the girl comedians, said, look, we can't have all you comedians in front of the cameras when the cameras come out there because we're going to diffuse our message. So that she said, Tom, you be the spokesman. Tom's going to do the spokesman. Big mistake on my part. I become the Jimmy Hoffa,
Yeah.
I get down there on ABC. Steve Bluestein did a great job. He got Variety, Hollywood Reporter. He got magazines. He got ABC, NBC, CBS. They were all down there, and it lasted 8 weeks. It was a horrible time for me because now I was supposed to go on a road with Sammy Davis. I had $50,000 worth of work with Sammy, but ever since I was a kid, once I got into a fight, I wanted to win. I don't care what sport I was in, boxing, where I wanted to win. I called Sammy and told him, Sammy said, Tommy, you're doing the right thing. Don't worry. You're with me when this is over. I thought it was going to be a week or two. It turned into 8 weeks, And finally, the story. We were going back and forth and back and forth. And I couldn't, and 19 people crossed the picket line, 18 guys and one girl. They weren't big names or anything like that. It wasn't like anything like that, but they were, got a chance to get more time, And one night, Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA wanted us to speak. They brought Mitzi's people and me. It was Biff Maynard and Danny Mora spoke for Mitzi, and me and Joanne Astro and Mark Lennon. And we spoke before the guild that we wanted them to support us. And anyhow, Biff did a terrible speech, said a stupid thing, and the next thing you know, the Screen Actors Guild pulled us aside and said, we're going to take a full page ad out and tell all actors, do not go to the Comedy Store, everybody in our industry, because you kids deserve to be paid. Well, Biff knows that. I go back to the Comedy Store, they're walking the picket line, and Biff comes up in his car, and he's racing his engine, and there's cars going, he was facing east, and there's cars going west. And I was talking to the people, and I see in the driveway, the comedians were in the driveway, and Jay Leno was in the driveway. I say, hey, you guys, because Biff is racing, round. And all of a sudden and boom, I hear a big sound. And everybody started screaming, Jay's laying on the ground. I said, oh my God, the girls are crying, he hit Jay. At that point, James, I said, I can't take this anymore. I'm going to break his jaw. When he comes out of that car, I had it. And Biff was a big, tough guy. I mean, I would have had my hands full for sure, but I was at a breaking point where I can't take this shit anymore. This is ridiculous. Now, I said, call an ambulance. There was no cell phones in those days. I kneeled down to see Jay, and Jay's laying on the ground, and he opens one eye and he winks at me, and he goes back down like that. What happened was what I didn't know, when Biff went by, he hit the car with his hand and fell down. I thought he hit because it thud. I heard that sound, Well, anyhow, Biff comes out of the car. And now Now ambulance come. Now Jay doesn't want to go in the ambulance, but the ambulance can't let you go. The paramedics can't. They've got to. The hospital is the one that can release you. So they haul Jay off in an ambulance. Argus Hamilton comes outside. He said, "Tom, Mitzi wants to talk to you." I go inside and we sat up till 4:30 in the morning and we settled the strike. It was over. And I never went back and then I finally went back about a year ago. But Steve Lebetkin, the reason why that book was called "I'm Dying Up Here," it's a double entendre. Because, when we comedians bomb, we say, "I died last night."
Yeah.
But Steve Lebetkin committed suicide. He kept calling in for times, and he wasn't getting any time slots. And part of our contract was she would not retaliate against anybody who walked the picket line. And Steve felt like she was being retaliated. And I gave a farewell meeting because I was going back on the road with Sammy Davis. And when I was leaving, I had to catch a plane. My wife was with me at the time, and Steve Lebetkin came up and he, please, Tommy, don't leave the group. Don't leave the group. I said, "Steve, I'm not leaving the group, but you guys are in charge. I've got to go back on the road again. It's over now." He said, "But Tommy, I called in 3 times for times and she wouldn't put me on." And I said, "She's going to. I promise you that. She's going to." But anyhow, he was so forlorn. I grabbed him by the shoulders. I said, "Steve, I won't go back till you go back. Okay? That's my word to you." I go on the road. I'm ready to go on stage. About a week and a half later, Jay Leno calls me in my dressing room. And he thought I just came off stage, but I was getting going on. He said, "Steve Lebetkin jumped off the top of the Continental Hyatt House, committed suicide, landed on the ramp by the Comedy Store."
Yep.
And he dove. His suicide note was, "My name is Steve Lebetkin. I used to work at the Comedy Store." And it just devastated me. I thought, man, I wish I'd have never got involved in this whole crazy mess. And I never went back. But they were doing a documentary on the Comedy Store, and Mike Binder,
Yep,
was directing it. And Peter Shore, Mitzi's son, called me and asked me, and I guess it was time. It was after 40-something years. So I went back, and I'm glad I did. The comics are getting paid, and I'm glad. Anyhow, I'll tell you something interesting though. I was in the main room like 4 or 5 times. I never asked for it. I'm still thinking old school. Come to find out, in the main room, you make $500 or $600 every time you do your set in the main room, because they split the door with you. That was part of our contract, that if the comedians worked the main room, that they didn't get the door, but they got half the door. So now they pay like $100 in the original room, and and whatever half the door is, it's usually $500 or $600. So Argus Hamilton makes $4,000 or $5,000. He works every Friday and Saturday there. So anyhow. That's the story of the Comedy Store strike.
Now there are still other clubs in LA and around America that don't pay comedians. I know Improv pays, Laugh Factory pays, and Comedy Store pays. There are a couple other clubs. I'm not going to say their names on here just not to be mean, but they don't pay comedians who do stage time. And I've often thought about this, taking your tactic or taking that idea to that club and saying, "Hey, you get more comedians coming here than any other place to start, and they bring people and all this stuff. You don't pay them a dime. Maybe there should be some kind of repercussions on that." There's a couple of clubs that do that, but
it won't happen, James. It won't happen.
No. Okay.
Now, even in my day, you were comedians that were willing to cross the picket line to get time spots. And today you have 10,000 more comedians than we had. 10,000 or more, maybe. There were no comedy clubs in America when I started. Today, there's 550. There were 3 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They got to fill those slots. And there's now comedians coming out of the woodwork or saying, "I'm a comedian." They get 5 or 10 minutes, but they'll never organize. You'll never be able to organize that. And now, it's even funny. Now they have this thing called bringers.
Yep.
You would. I remember my daughter was working at Ralph's Supermarket, and she said, "Doris, one of our checkout girls, she's a comedian." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, she wants to be a comedian because everybody tells her she's funny." And I said, "Oh, that's nice." And my daughter tells me 2 weeks later, "Doris is booked at the Comedy Store." I said, "Really? Doris is booked at the Comedy Store?" I mean, she just started 2 weeks ago. She must be hysterical. What I don't know is Doris agreed to bring like 30 or 40 people. They were called bringers at that time, and you could bring 30 or 40 people, and they paid the cover charge. and they paid for the drinks, So the house, that was a good deal. So say those 30 or 40 people end up spending 1,000 or 2,000, whatever they spend it with drinks and door fee. So you're actually paying like $1,000 to do 20 minutes. You're paying to do stand-up comedy. You're not asking to be paid. You and I open up a comedy club and say, hey, what do you want? 20 minutes? Bring in 30 people. So if we get 4 or 5 acts, you and I are going to get, filthy rich. This is the life we chose, James.
Yeah. I love it. I love being a comedian. I love what I do. I feel blessed to be able to go on stage and tell jokes and then have people pay me afterwards and people say that I had a great show and made them laugh. All that stuff. All those things are amazing byproducts of being, a stand-up comedian. Now, when are you going to go back on tour with your one-man show? Where can people see it? Where can people find you? All that kind of stuff.
You can always go to tomdreesen.com. DREESEN. They always put 2 S's in there, but it's 1 S, DREESEN.com. And I just came off the road. Now I'm going out again. September next month. I go to Chicago. Next month I'm doing Michigan City, Indiana, my one-man show, The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. I'm doing Lake Forest, Illinois, which is north of Chicago, my one-man show, in the John Hughes Theater there.
Wow.
Michigan City, Indiana, I'm in a theater. And then it's called the Uptown Social Theater or something like that. And then I'm doing I'm doing a motivation speech as I said earlier, at Zanies in Chicago. And then I'm throwing out the first pitch at Wrigley Field on September 8th. And I'm singing the 7th inning. They sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. I do that every year for 20-something years. Yeah, I'm going on the road a lot in September. But you can go to my website, tomdreesen.com.
Perfect. Now, the Joy Stand-Up Comedy and how to get there, is there a like a YouTube version of that somewhere where someone could go watch that if they haven't got to see you do it live? Is it something like that?
I'm going to do that one day. I give motivation talks to corporate America and to college students and everything for fees, but for the comedians, I do it for free because. But I'm going to eventually, do that, get it all down on one. But for now, I just, I don't want to bring a film crew and everything,
right?
Because I ad-lib so much during that. But it's structured, as I told you, visualization, perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. For this reason, look, I've known 5 stand-up comedians who committed suicide. They were great comedians, really. We're talking Robin Williams. We're great stand-up comedians. Richard Jeni, who was one of the most prolific stand-up comedians I've ever met in my life. But to me, this is my humble opinion, James. 85% of all stand-up comedians I met in my life are sometimes neurotic, sometimes psychotic, sometimes love-starved wrecks, insecure, neurotic, love-starved wreck. The other 15% are gifted, confident people who say, I know how to write a joke and I know how to tell a joke. I like to think I'm in the latter, but never trust somebody that tells you they're sane,
Right.
But anyhow, so this is my observation. So I go to them to motivate them because this is by far the greatest profession on the planet. And when I say that, excuse me, when I say that, it's for this reason. Laughter is healing. It's no longer a theory. It's a fact now. We've always known that laughter is psychologically a deterrent because the brain can't think of 2 thoughts at the same time. So if you're watching a comedian, you're laughing, you're not thinking of your problem. So psychologically a deterrent. But because of a guy, Norman Cousins, he wrote a book called Laughter Math, and he wrote another book called The Anatomy of an Illness. He was diagnosed with a heart ailment. Years of stress made him have a bad heart. He was in a hospital. The doctors told him he didn't have long to live. He laid in the hospital and he thought, if negative input, stress made me ill, then positive input should make me well. He checked out of the hospital. He'd only watch I Love Lucy reruns, Candid Camera, Three Stooges, The Marx Brothers. He wouldn't watch the evening news. He would play comedy records. And he lived 27 years after the doctors told him he was going to die. Wow. So because of him, UCLA did research. What happens to the human body when you laugh? When you laugh and have a hearty laugh, and after a laugh, you go, Oh, and the sense of well-being comes over you. It's because your body's gone through an actual chemical change. Endorphins are released from the brain into the bloodstream. So laughter is not only psychologically a deterrent, it's physiologically therapeutic. Therefore, comedians are physicians of the soul. Dr. James. But so laughter is healing. So why I encourage them in this wonderful profession that we're in, people are better off for having had our service. Service to humanity is the best work of life. Stand-up comedians, it's the greatest profession on the planet. Don't tarnish that. I motivate them to go on to be all you can be. And don't use drugs and alcohol to get you on the stage, because this is the most important part of your comedy is your brain, and eventually it will destroy you. So anyhow, that's what I give motivation talks about. I want them to continue on in this great profession that we're in. And let me end with this. That 1%, that years ago, they did a survey around the world, the insurance companies, of the 10 fears of man. It took them 8 years to complete the survey. The 10 fears of man. Death was fourth. Pain was second. Getting up in front of an audience was the number one fear of mankind. Now, if you can get up in front of an audience and you can make them laugh, if you can get up in front of an audience and you're a house painter and you talk about house painting for an hour, you're in less than 1% of the population of the world. If you can get up and make them laugh for an hour, you're in 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the population of the world. Do you know how special you are? Don't destroy that. Okay, that's my speech.
I'm going to cut this part of the podcast out for myself and just replay it over and over again every day for the rest of my life, because that is the greatest motivation ever. I've never thought about it that way. I just think like, oh, I'm up here telling jokes, making people laugh. Great, great, great. But you know what? That right there, that's it. The rest of this podcast was great. That was the gold. That was the diamond in the rough there. So Mr. Dreesen, I seriously appreciate your time. I seriously appreciate everything. I am so happy. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm going to put all the links to Mr. Dreesen stuff in all the show notes below. I'll link everything there. Thank you all for listening. Please go like, subscribe, go check out his stuff, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.